Director of Public, and this is now almost the end of Kids Week. Are you guys having fun? Woohoo! Here today. See, I've almost lost my voice because I've been here the whole week. But I'm not going to waste any time. We're going to get going right away. So we're going to meet some really two wonderful people who've come here a few times. For those of you who know we're talking to people about space, do you guys think it's easy to go to space? No. Really difficult to go to space? Yeah. Would you like to go to space? How many of you want to be an astronaut? Everybody?
All right.
All right.
Do you know that there are other jobs at NASA besides astronaut? Well, one of them is flight director. So we have a flight director and an astronaut. And I'm going to introduce them right now and let them take over. Ricky Arnold and Allison Bollinger.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Thanks.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Well, thanks, Ellen, for having us. Like Ellen mentioned, Ricky and I are visiting here from Houston, Texas. We work at NASA's Johnson Space Center. And there at NASA, Ricky is a world-famous astronaut, and I am a newly minted flight director. So I'll talk a little bit more about my background.
I want to interrupt just a second.
Oh, this is going to happen a lot.
She told me to interrupt, yes. There have been over 500 and some people who have been into space. There have been less than 100 people in the history of human spaceflight at NASA that have been a flight director. This is the most difficult job to get at NASA. And so you kind of blow through it, but I think it's important for people to know how important the job of flight director is.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. I appreciate that. Okay, so a little bit about me. I grew up in Central Ohio, and I loved math and science and space. How many people here love math and science and space? That's awesome. And I was lucky enough to be able to go to space camp when I was in 6th grade. There's a picture of me up at the Kennedy Space Center with my perm and braces. And then I went again when I was a senior in high school in Huntsville, Alabama. And that was a great way for me to experience things associated with NASA and kind of get pumped up for my future ahead.
It's like going to camp. Yeah.
Right. So I went to Purdue University, which is in West Lafayette, Indiana, and there I majored in aerospace engineering. And while I was at Purdue, it took me 5 years to graduate, but that extra time was well worth it because there I was involved in the cooperative education program or internship. So I would go to school for a semester, and then I'd head down to Houston, Texas, and work at Johnson for a semester. So it extended my graduation by a year, but it allowed me to really test out my degree to make sure aerospace engineering is truly what I wanted to do. So I've been at NASA for about 15 and a half years now, and interestingly enough, Ricky and I started at NASA right around the same time, despite him being much, much older than me. So I've been there for about 15 and a half years, and for about 12 years, I trained astronauts to do spacewalks. So this presentation is focused on the team effort that it takes to get ready for spacewalks, and that's how Ricky and I first met each other, is as a trainer, I trained him how to do spacewalks. And then like Ellen said, after that, I became a flight director. I was selected about a year and a half ago. And so my initial training in the flight director school was to learn all about the International Space Station, all the different components. I knew a lot about the outside of the space station because that's what we do in spacewalking is we fix the outside. But I now had to learn about how all of the inside systems of the space station worked. So here's a little bit more about a few pictures of flight director. So does anybody know who this gentleman is on the right side of these photos? That is Gene Kranz, one of the original flight directors. And so what's neat about this is that top picture was when I was an intern back in 2001, when I still had starry eyes about what I was going to be able to achieve at NASA. And here I am with Gene back in July when we were celebrating 50 years since the Apollo 11 moon landing. So it's pretty neat to come full circle and now to be able to tell Gene I'm a flight director. So flight director, for those of you who don't know, basically I'm in charge of running mission control. My primary objective is to keep the astronauts safe. First and foremost, that's always our primary objective. Keep the astronauts safe, keep the space station safe. This is a multi-billion-dollar international collaboration that we'll talk about. And then third, our objective is to complete the mission. So we'll have a little pictures.
Keep us busy.
Yeah, and keep them busy. So you can see me here. This was actually on just this past Tuesday. We'll talk a little bit more about the mission that I led. And I'd also like to point out my patch. So each flight director gets to name a call sign. So the original flight director, Dr. Christopher Kraft, he was red flight. And you might know Gene Kranz was white flight, and he would wear those white vests. Well, I'm flight director number 95. So by the time we got to 95, we had used all the colors, all the elements, all the minerals. They had gone through a lot of different things. So I went with Athena flight. And so I had a friend help me design that patch. So that's my patch as Athena flight. So that's a little bit about me. So now I'll hand it over to Ricky, and he can talk about himself.
Only one of these is in black and white. Yeah, so I grew up in Maryland. I was really interested in the Baltimore Orioles, which folks in New York will find comical. But as a kid, that was something I was really excited about, and also was very excited about some of the later missions that went to the moon. This is actually me. I got an astronaut outfit once for Christmas. However, as a kid, those were things I dreamt about, but they never seemed like something that would be achievable. They just seemed like something that was really far off and really difficult to do. And so while I dreamt about doing things like those, I actually, go to the next one, ended up, before becoming an astronaut, I worked as a math and science teacher, grades 6 through 12. And I taught in Maryland and taught in various countries around the world before finally I decided, I'd really like to apply and at least see what would happen if I put my name in the hat to become a NASA astronaut. And fortunately, I was selected in 2004. Same time Allison came to NASA, and I went from being a teacher to once again being a student. I think there's a message there that you are never, ever done learning.
Never.
You think you finished school, think you finished elementary school, well then you got middle school. You think you finished middle school, then high school, college, graduate school. And even when you get to work, no matter what you do, you're constantly going to be learning. And that's the real gift of this wonderful mind we have, is that you can keep it active and engaged and find things that you're curious about and learn about them. It's awesome. And that's been one of my favorite parts of my job, is constant learning. Of course, the other part is flying in space. There's a couple of pictures from missions I have been on. This is most recently on the International Space Station. I flew as a crew of 3 from the Baikonur Cosmodrome and spent 197 days in the space station. Prior to that, the upper picture there is an assembly mission when I flew the Space Shuttle Discovery, which is down in another museum in Virginia, to the International Space Station to help finish construction of the International Space Station. So I've been able to fly on a shuttle and a Soyuz, 2 kind of iconic spaceships, and I got to help build the space station, and then got to live in it for a long period of time. And so Alice and I are going to share a little bit of what it takes to put the International Space Station together. How do we build this remarkable engineering achievement in space? I think it is humanity's greatest engineering achievement. How many people have seen the space station fly overhead at night?
All right, do you guys know you can do that?
You know you can do that?
You can pull up the NASA app on your phone, enter your location, and it'll notify you when the space station is going to go overhead. On a clear night, when you have a good pass, it takes it 6 minutes to get all the way across the sky, and it's one of the brightest objects in the nighttime sky.
It doesn't blink, it's moving fast, and it's pretty obvious, it's pretty bright, and it'll eventually fade off into this once it loses the ability to bounce light off from the sun. So it's worth doing.
It's really cool. All right, so we talked about the International Space Station a lot. Do you guys know about the International Space Station? Yes.
Yes.
It is the only scientific laboratory that's currently orbiting about 250 miles above our head. So it's truly an international collaboration between 5 different space agencies: NASA, the Russian Space Agency, Canadian Space Agency, Japanese Space Agency, and the European Space Agency. And they're representing 15 different countries that have helped build this International Space Station. We launched the first component way back in 1998, and we're getting close to celebrating 20 years of continuous human presence in space. So think about that. For almost 20 years, we've had at least 2 or 3 people up in space. It is a pretty incredible achievement.
Yeah, for your entire lives, someone's been living in space.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So the inside, and Ricky can talk a bit more about this, the inside, or what we call the habitable volume, the modules where the astronauts live and work, is about the size of a...
Can you point to those?
I don't know. Do I have a laser? Oh,
There
I
you
do.
go.
These are right here.
Yeah.
Okay, so where the astronauts live and work, it's about the size of a 5-bedroom house. And including the solar arrays, which is how the space station generates power, it's the size of a football field, including the end zones. So it's pretty big. And currently we have 3 people. We alternate between 3 or 6 people, and eventually we'll get up to having 7 people living on the International Space Station. So Ricky, do you want to talk about a little bit what it's like living inside a 5-bedroom house with 5 of your closest friends for 6 months?
It sounds really small, but it was very comfortable. You learn to respect each other's privacy. We each had our own little sleep cabin, which is about the size of a large refrigerator, which sounds really small, but it was your place. And when the door was closed, you were in there doing your thing, whatever it was, talking to home, sleeping, reading. But if your door was open, you were inviting people to come socialize and to bother you and do those other kind of things just to sit and chit-chat. But it's a very comfortable place, and the views were better than any other house I've ever lived in. So.
We'll see a little bit more about those views. So let's talk about building the International Space Station. So I mentioned we launched the first piece back in 1998. So it took a total of 37 space shuttle flights and a couple Russian rocket launches to get all these components up in space through 2011 when we stopped flying the space shuttle and finished completion for the most part of the space station. So each time you see a new element being added to the space station, that represents a space shuttle flight and a series of spacewalks to help assemble that new element, as well as using the robotic arm to, say, move things out of the space shuttle payload bay to attach it up to the space station. So you can see we're getting close. We're in 2002 when we're starting to attach more pieces of the truss or the backbone of the space station. And so right now we've got solar arrays on the top of the space station, and we sent up a new set of solar arrays. And that's how I mentioned how we get power on the International Space Station. Retract some solar arrays, and we're getting close to Ricky's space shuttle mission. It's coming up. Almost there.
Incredibly important space shuttle mission.
We got to relocate.
You can see we have 2 sets of arrays on one side of the truss and only 1 set on the other. So after the Columbus module came, we ended up with the Japanese lab, which is going to be attached now, which is the largest module on the space station. You can see the Japanese flag on it. We brought up the S6 truss, which was about the size of a school bus, weighed 16 tons, carried it in the back of the payload bay. And because we had all this internal volume or internal space for people to live and work, we just needed electricity so we could have 6 people live and work there. Prior to the S6 truss being installed, we could only have 3 people. After the S6, we could have 6 people. And when you have 6 people, you can get a lot more work done. So that really enabled us to do a lot more science, which is the reason the International Space Station was built.
Yeah, definitely. And so I mentioned we call it assembly complete at the end of the space shuttle program in 2011, but since then we have added a few new modules to accommodate commercial crew docking, which is going to happen later this year. So after we retired the space shuttle, and Ricky got to experience this, we relied on the Russian Soyuz rocket in order to get NASA astronauts to space. But pretty soon, our partnerships with SpaceX and the Boeing company are going to allow us to launch NASA astronauts from US soil, which is very exciting. So that should be happening sometime this year. So let's see, what else do we have? All right.
Oh.
We got a shuttle launch.
We do. This is what it's like to fly on a space shuttle. This is actually our launch from Florida in March of 2009. As I said, we had something the size of a bus packed in the back of the space shuttle and 7 crew members up in the little tiny windows you can see up at the top of the space shuttle. This is just a wild ride. The main engines fire, the whole stack pitches forward, and then when it bounces back, they light the solid rocket motors, and then even the announcer was excited. You go from sitting still at sea level, and in 8.5 minutes, you're going to be traveling over 17,000 miles an hour, which means you're going to be able to go around the Earth about 90 minutes. You can see most of the plume coming out. The flames are from the solid rocket motors. They only burn for about 2.5 minutes. They were going to separate, and you can see the space shuttle fly away. The solid rocket motors will tumble back to Earth, land in the ocean. We pulled them out of the sea, refurbished them, and used them again. And we were just riding on the orange tank. There's the crew of 3 waiting for us up on the space station. We were Sandy's ride home. We were a month late. She was very excited that we were coming to get her. She'd been up there for about 3 months, was only supposed to be there for 3 months. Got a bonus month. And this is, you're actually looking at the external tank. All the liquid oxygen and hydrogen, which we use as fuel, is burnt off. and we separate and are in orbit.
So the neat thing that Ricky has is he's one of a handful of astronauts who have been able to experience both a space shuttle launch as well as a Soyuz launch. So this next video we'll show is his Soyuz launch back in 2018.
Which you saw in person.
Which I was lucky enough to be able to fly over to Baikonur, Kazakhstan and watch this launch.
So we launched from the same pad as Yuri Gagarin. Does that name ring a bell? The first human to fly in space. We actually launched from the same launch pad that Yuri Gagarin launched from. The shuttle's kind of a big lumbering truck because it has to haul really heavy things to orbit. This is a bit more like a sports car. You have 3 people and very few items with you, and I kind of liken it to being riding up to space in the trunk of a car with 2 of your best friends. There'll be some, I think there's some in-cabin view. Is there in-cabin view on this? I don't think so. But you're kind of hunched up in a ball, and there's 3 of you squeezed in a little small capsule. There is actually a Soyuz, there's a Soyuz landing capsule here at the museum. So you want to get a feel for how small that is for 3 people, go take a look at that today. You can also actually compare it to the space shuttle, and you get a real idea of the difference in size.
All right, and so we'll have time for questions at the end, so your hand doesn't get too tired. Okay, so we talked a lot about spacewalking. So when Ricky was in space, he created 2 really neat videos that you guys can find online through NASA if you want to share these with your friends or share them with your teachers to show your classes. So we're going to take some time to watch these videos where Ricky explains really well what spacewalking is like and what sort of team it takes to do that. So we will play.
There are a lot of these videos that were put together during the year of education on station. They're called demonstrations, and they talk a lot about solar power, how the truss holds the space station together, how to do a spacewalk, how do we get water in space. So go check those out on YouTube. They're called demonstrations, and hopefully you'll enjoy them.
Do you guys know how we get drinking water on the space station? Okay, through tubes. We actually recycle. We do ship some up, but for the most part now we're recycling urine to make water. So that's how we make, it's perfectly clean water. Ricky can attest to it. It tastes just fine. It tastes just like water. But I mean, truthfully, this is a technology that we are going to need in order to be able to go back to the moon and onto Mars. We need to find ways to reclaim every single thing that we can. So learning how to successfully recycle urine to turn it into drinking water is very important.
The water we generate on the space station is cleaner than any municipal water system on Earth. And it's a technology not only, as Allison said, do we need for exploration, but there are water-starved communities here on this planet, and being able to recycle any water to make it drinkable is a really useful technology for people all around the world, even including here in the US.
Definitely. All right, let's roll these next videos. Uh-oh.
I'm talking.
He's talking. Imagine, if you will, Ricky saying, "Hi, welcome to the International Space Station. I'm Ricky Arnold."
Well, I can tell you I'm actually in the Quest airlock. So this was filmed in space as we get the audio working. We have the spacesuits actually are kind of in various states of getting ready for a spacewalk. You're looking from the node where we actually have our galley. That's where we share our meals and cook our food. And you're looking into the airlock. You can see 2 spacesuits on the sides. That's where we will actually get suited up. And you're looking into the, oh, I just froze. You're looking into the actual airlock. And there's a bunch of stuff stored behind me, but we would pull all that stuff out, and that's where we climb in before a spacewalk, close the hatch behind us, depressurize the crew lock with 2 people in it, and then we head out into space. Are we having any luck with volume?
Nope. Okay. So he's talking about training. So all the training that it takes on the ground to be able to go into space. So we do a lot of the training. That previous facility you saw is an artificial gravity simulator, if you will. So we hook them up in a harness, and it feels like you're weightless, so you can learn how to use some of these tools. Here are some videos of high-definition videos of when you're actually out doing a spacewalk.
And you get a sense for how things are in constant motion because we don't have gravity. And so that's always a challenge, is kind of keeping stuff out of your way and keeping it organized and keeping track of it. We also have high-fidelity equipment on the ground, so before we go and actually use the really expensive, irreplaceable equipment on orbit, we practice with it on the ground just in shirt sleeve.
And so this was the job that I did. I did not have a big beard like Darren, but this was the job I did in training astronauts to get ready. So where we do a majority of that training is in the neutral buoyancy lab, which I think it gives the statistics. It's one of the world's largest indoor pools. It's
6.5 million gallons?
6.2 million gallons of water that we keep at a balmy 86 degrees Fahrenheit. The pool is 202 feet by 102 feet by 40 feet deep. And because we're in Houston at sea level, we're 20 feet above ground, 20 feet below ground when it comes to the depth of the neutral buoyancy lab.
And you can actually see we have a space station laid out in the pool. And what we will do is we will show up for work at 7 in the morning. We will get suited up, and we will get lowered into the water by a crane. And for 6.5 hours, we'll work in the pool. And the advantage of using the pool is the divers can take us down and weigh us out so we float. And so it simulates some aspects of what it's like to be on orbit.
Yeah, exactly. And so each astronaut will do at least 18 training runs before he or she flies into space. Most of them end up getting a lot more training, but if you were to hire a brand new astronaut, they would get 9 basic training runs, and then they would get 9 more runs once they're assigned for a specific time that they're going to go up to the International Space Station as part of an increment. But you can see, each astronaut will have 3 or 4 divers helping them throughout their run to help manage the umbilical. That yellow hose you can see off to the right is how the astronaut's getting the nitrox to breathe, the cooling water, communications power to their suit. Normally all those functions are provided by the backpack on the real spacesuit, but in the pool we utilize the umbilical to provide the capabilities. So I'm trying to read. So it says for 5 hours, and this number varies, but they're going to practice each spacewalk at least 5 hours for every 1 hour they spend up in space. Usually it's a bit more.
You can see we're surrounded by divers here. These are old spacesuits that have been used over and over and over again. So we have divers there helping us manage the tools. We have divers, as Allison was saying, to help keep track of our life support stuff. We also have divers just there to help in case there's an emergency. Sometimes the suits will spring a leak, not very often, and we can't get ourselves to the surface of the pool on our own. We're relying on the divers to get us out. Also, it's a building with a lot of industrial stuff going on. So if there's a fire or a tornado or a severe thunderstorm,
ice storm,
we have divers that can actually help pull us out and get us out of the water.
So this is showing the morning of what it looks like in space to get an astronaut ready to go out the door. So
you can see the actual airlock, crew lock with the bag floating around back and forth in the back is now cleaned out, and those are all the tools we're going to take out with us. Our crew members are going to help us get changed, get suited up. We're in the suit for about 4 hours trying to get all the nitrogen out of our bloodstream, because just like when you do a long scuba dive or a deep scuba dive, nitrogen bubbles can cause a problem. We can get decompression sickness. And then we head outside. This is actually Drew and I.
Yes. Yeah. So this is, were you EV2? You were EV1.
EV1 on this one,
So
yeah.
Ricky was the guy with the red stripes on his legs.
So we have 2 crew members go out at a time. One is the lead, called EV1, or a spacewalker 1, and that's the person who's really in command of the spacewalk. And then EV2 is there. The second person is there as the support for the spacewalk. But we need someone out there who's responsible for making the decisions about what's going to happen. We also have a team on the ground who are also responsible for helping us make decisions about what's the best way to move forward, because we're wearing these spacesuits. They're sending a ton of data down to the ground. Even our heart rate is being sent to the ground. So they have a lot more information about how the spacesuits are performing, what's going on the space station, than the 2 guys or gals outside working on the ISS.
So talk a little bit more about the training facilities that we use. That right there is the simplified aid for EVA rescue. So this would be in the extremely unlikely event that you had an issue with your safety tether, which is how the astronauts are normally attached to the space station to keep them safe. If something went wrong, you could use this simplified aid for EVA rescue. It's got compressed nitrogen. You can flip a lever, it'll deploy a hand controller, and you can fly yourself back to the space station. So we make sure the astronauts practice this in virtual reality to make sure they're ready in the, like I said, extremely unlikely event that something goes wrong there.
I think here I'm just saying goodbye.
And you can go to nasa.gov/demonstrations. For the next video, do you want to see if you can cycle connections, maybe, if we can get the audio back? Oh, okay. So just a few more things. We talked about it. He said 4 hours to get ready before you go outside to do your spacewalk. The spacewalk itself is normally scheduled for 6.5 hours. So that's about 10 or 11 astronauts that
11
astronauts.
in one suit.
11 in one suit. It's like a clown car of space. 10 or 11 hours that Ricky's inside this spacesuit. So it's
It's a long day.
incredible.
You get up in the morning, you eat breakfast, and then you go to work, and the only thing you have, and you're working pretty hard. Most of the doctors will tell you you're working at about a light jog for about 6.5 hours. Sometimes you're working harder, so you're working harder than a light jog. And the only thing you have is during that time, once you put the helmet on, is a drink bag for water. So you're pretty hungry at the end of a long day in a spacesuit.
So we talk about that hopefully in the next video if we can get the audio working. So like Ricky said, 11 hours in the suit and 32 ounces of water. That's all you have, and you don't have any food or anything. So let's see. Should I try it? Nope. All right, Ricky's back.
Oh.
So the guys at the museum joke that every time, I've been fortunate enough to be invited back here a couple times to talk about my passions with spacewalking, and every time there's an AV issue. Yeah, of course, stop it, please.
What we're going to do here is I'm just talking through what is all the equipment we use. So even if this doesn't work, we have most of it ready.
Yeah, we have most of the equipment up here, so we can talk
see
about
if
it.
we can get this started.
All right, we probably have time for a question. Does anyone have a question? You had your hand up earlier. What's your question?
I saw on this YouTube video that there was the Soviets built a space shuttle too, and in some ways it had features that were better than the American space shuttle, like controllable liquid nitrogen rockets, because those things could just burn and then that's it. But then the Soviets ones could be controlled. I think the Soviets the space shuttle is called
The Buran?
Buran, yeah.
Yep. Do you know anything about the Buran?
The Buran flew uncrewed. I think it flew once, maybe twice, uncrewed. You probably know more than I do. I've actually seen the Buran because there is one of the training vehicles. There's one at Gorky Park in Moscow, which I think was just used for testing. And there was one in Baikonur, which I think was a training unit. But it never flew with humans on it. Now, I think what you're saying is they didn't use solid rocket motors. Is that what you're referring to? Because once our solid rocket motors on the space shuttle ignited, they were going to burn.
They were good. Yep.
Yeah, but I don't know about what they used for the rocket, for the boosters on the side. I do know that unfortunately, those Buran vehicles were all down in Baikonur, and they were really, should have been in a museum somewhere. And unfortunately, the building where they were kept collapsed and destroyed most of them. Yeah.
the space shuttle was carried by a Boeing 747?
Yep.
Well, the Buran was carried by the biggest cargo lifters in the world, the Antonov AN-25.
Right. Yep. Those are big, funny-looking planes. Yeah.
Let's get the next question on the mic so that it gets
Okay.
recorded. You had your hand up first?
Why do you guys train in water?
Why do we train in water? What do you think? Have you been in a swimming pool before? What does it feel like when you're in a pool? It feels like you're floating around, exactly. So training astronauts in water is the best way to simulate microgravity. So Ricky, how does it feel when you train in water compared to when you were actually doing the spacewalks?
There are some similarities because things are floating around, and like our tools, we use lighter weight tools in the pool. Like this is simulating what one of our drills looks like, which is made of metal and it's really heavy, but this is just made of plastic, so it's a little bit more buoyant, or it floats a bit in the water. The thing that's different, and you probably saw, there was a picture of a guy it was Drew trying to take a picture of me. He was floating all around and couldn't get stable. In the pool, you kind of have your head pointing toward the surface of the water and your feet pointing to the bottom of the pool, and you don't get a lot of side-to-side motion like you do in space. You're kind of stable. And the other thing, which the first time someone does a spacewalk, they always learn the hard way, is when you're moving through water, is it easy? Like if you're trying to run in water that was about this deep, is it easy to run?
No, not at all.
No, because so water has a lot of resistance. So when we get used to translating in our suits, and the suits weigh several hundred pounds, and you're pulling yourself along the space station, you have to pull really hard to keep that spacesuit moving through the water. But in space, is there anything slowing you down? No, so what typically happens is someone gets going and then they're counting on the water to slow them down and stop them, and you end up going way too far. Or I remember one of my friends, one of his first spacewalks, he was coming up to the front end of the space station and ended up sticking his head right into the space station and then didn't know where he was, because you can move so much faster because there's no water slowing you down.
So we definitely, when we're training the astronauts, we remind them that there's a speed limit of the spacesuit. So we make sure that they don't get translating too fast in the water, so that they're not establishing bad habits that then carry over when they're in space.
Are we getting closer with this, or?
Maybe. Yeah, we could do one more question.
About water, can you just bring your own water from Earth?
You can bring your own water, but it's very, very heavy. I don't know if this number is still accurate, $10,000 a pound? It might even be more than that now.
Yeah.
So the $10,000 a pound, think how heavy water is. If you bring a jug of water, that's about 8 pounds.
Is it gravity?
Just because of, the thrust that it takes and the rocket fuel it takes to get up there. So it's very, very heavy to bring your own water. So that's why we try to generate as much as we can on the space station.
Plus payload, there's a lot of stuff going up that people
exactly.
pay money
Yeah,
for.
you don't want to just fill your rocket with water.
Yeah.
You want to fill it with new science
Stuff.
experiments, fresh fruits for these guys to eat, as well as clean clothes. Because Ricky's been wearing the same shirt for a long time.
Long time. And this is one of the reasons when we go back to the moon, we're going to go to the South Pole, because there is ice on the South Pole of the moon. So we can use water that is there rather than having to lug it to the moon, which is even going to the space station, getting to low Earth orbit's about 8.5 minutes, getting to the moon's about 4 days. Martian soil, a section about the size of a refrigerator, you can isolate about 1 gallon of water from the soil of Mars. So when we go to Mars, we also want to be able to extract water from the planetary surface rather than to carry jugs of water along on our own, because it's just really expensive and really heavy.
Yeah. So Daniel, do you think it's going to work? We can just call it quits on it. Okay. So
Why?
do I still have control? All right. So the video that we were, I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. Can you, don't forget it. Okay?
I won't
All right.
forget.
So the video, do we want to show the EMU video?
Why don't we just talk about some of the tools, and then
Okay.
we can talk about the spacesuit later, because this is going to be just me pointing out the different parts and some of the stuff we have here.
Well, okay, maybe we can do kind of a live action. As you're talking, we can show some stuff.
You're the flight director.
So as Ricky will point out, we've been working together for a very long time. And truthfully, so my responsibility, Ricky mentioned when you're out doing a spacewalk, he's out there with a buddy, and the guy wearing the red stripes is EV1, and he's responsible for kind of making decisions. And so while truthfully, they're ultimately Johnny on the spot, eyes on the scene, they can make the decisions. As the flight director down in Mission Control, it's really my responsibility to help direct them one way or another. If they think, because they might think, this is what we want to do next in the spacewalk when things start going wrong. But like Ricky mentioned, we get a lot more data from the spacesuit, from the other components of the space station. So we have all the information on the ground, and we can say, actually, you don't want to do this because you don't know yet, but we're seeing a small leak in your spacesuit. So we really need to make sure you come inside. So some of the things, let's see, he's talking about the suit, the mini workstation on this suit.
Well, let's just talk with layers. So the first thing we start with in the morning, the first thing you put on is this. Anyone know what that is?
High-tech, maximum absorbency garment.
Though, because the spacesuit, it does have radios, it does have thermal, like you can control the temperature of the spacesuit, because when you're in the sun, it can be a couple hundred degrees. When you're in the shade, it could be minus a couple hundred degrees. So you have these huge temperature swings. So we can control the temperature. We have oxygen tanks. We can scrub carbon dioxide, because we produce a lot of carbon dioxide. We have radios. We have everything basically we need to keep a human alive in this little tiny spaceship we call an EMU, or a spacesuit, for about 6.5, 7, 8 hours. The only thing we really don't have, well, we don't have like food.
Minor
we have
detail.
water, but we don't have a bathroom. So first layer is this really fancy diaper, which you wear. The next layer are just basically a pair of long johns, commercial long johns, just because. And they're made out of kind of like the material
like
that you exercise in. So if you're perspiring while you're working out there, it helps pull the sweat away from your body. And then it also provides a little bit of protection, because the spacesuit is hard. and you can end up with getting bruises and abrasions from working inside this hard shell. The next layer is one we have.
So this is
Fancy looking.
The LCVG, or liquid cooling and ventilation garment. So think about, you're inside your spacesuit. The whole purpose of the spacesuit is to be airtight so that your precious oxygen doesn't leak out. So the same thing happens with your body heat, though. As you're working in your body heat, you're making the oxygen inside the suit warmer and warmer, and that volume around your body. You would overheat in about 30 minutes. If you weren't wearing this cooling garment, within a matter of about 30 minutes, you would overheat and pass out from heat exhaustion. So this cooling garment is a really cool piece of technology to keep the astronauts comfortable.
Yes.
So you can see we've got hundreds of feet of tubing, little tiny plastic tubing, that runs all over Ricky's body. And what it does is it's actually circulating cold water. So he has a knob on the front of his spacesuit that he can use to adjust the temperature of the water that's flowing over his body. So this is definitely a very important thing inside your spacesuit.
So that's the next layer. And then we actually get into the spacesuit that you're familiar with, that you saw sitting on the racks there. And it basically has two main components. It has the lower portion, which are kind of like the pants, and then it has a big stainless ring. And there's a picture. You can see Jessica and Christina wearing the lower torso assembly, the pants. And then it has the upper torso assembly, which is where you wear over your chest. And that is, the lower torso assembly is kind of soft material, but it still has a big stainless ring. And then the hard upper torso has another stainless ring, but that's made of fiberglass. So it's actually kind of like a hard shell that you have to squeeze into, and you're kind of wearing it like this. So and then those two big stainless rings are sealed together to hold oxygen in.
All right, and then you put on your helmet, and you put on your gloves, and then you're ready to go out, and hopefully your boots are already on.
Boots, yeah, you got to wear those too.
You got to wear boots. It'd be a bad idea to go out to do your spacewalk without wearing boots.
The cool thing about these gloves, as you can imagine, and I talk a little bit this in the video, everyone's hands are different. So we have a whole array of different gloves for people to try to find one that fits well. There's only one other person's gloves that I can wear, but if I couldn't find a good glove fit, we build a custom one. Because these are what you're doing most of your work with. You don't use your feet really for anything. And when you think about a spacesuit, it's pressurized, right? So what are these fingers going to do on the glove? How are they going to be? Are they going to be nice and relaxed? Or when the suit's pressurized, are they going to be inflated? What do you think? Inflated,
like
exactly. So every time you're moving your hand, the glove wants to inflate. So your hands get really, really tired and get really sore. So it's really important that your gloves fit the way they're supposed to. If they don't fit the way they're supposed to, you get really bad bruising. We've had people lose fingernails because it's a hard work environment. And so the gloves are probably the most critical piece of this for being able to do the work outside.
Yeah, and so Ricky had mentioned right here we've got Jessica and Christina, and if you guys remember, they participated in the first all-female spacewalk that we did. Was it just last month that we did that? And so Christina actually just returned home after spending 328 days in space.
Yeah.
So she's the record holder for females, and she spent a lot of time up there. And so this kind of this shows the timeline of what the day looks like to get ready for a spacewalk. So Ricky mentioned you're inside the spacesuit for about 3.5, 4 hours. And you're getting suited up. You're doing that pre-breathe protocol to get the nitrogen out of your body so you don't get the bends or decompression sickness. So this, you can see they wake up, the clock up here, they wake up at 6 a.m. They have a little bit of time to get breakfast. And by 7 a.m., they're starting to get in their suit. They don't actually start their 6.5-hour EVA until about noon. So think about it, you're getting up at 6 a.m., you're getting ready to go, and you don't actually start really working until noon. So it's a very long day for the crew. So by the time they're in, it's almost 8 p.m. So it's been a long day for these guys to get ready. So you can see some of the things that the astronauts are doing on the ground in space. And here are some pictures of what it looks like in mission control, so folks that are monitoring. So my job, as I mentioned, for a long time, I worked in mission control being in charge of spacewalks. But with my promotion to flight director, I'm now in charge of every mission that comes up to the space station, including the uncrewed mission. So this was a commercial cargo resupply mission, NG-13, or Northrop Grumman. It was the 13th launch of the Northrop Grumman Cygnus vehicle. And this cargo mission was named after Air Force Major Robert Henry Lawrence Jr., and he was the first African American to be selected as an astronaut back in 1967. Unfortunately, he died in a plane crash just a few months later, so he never got a chance to fly in space. So we named this Cygnus vehicle after him. So my job as the flight director for this mission was to make sure the teams were prepared and to make sure the astronauts were trained on board to be ready to go for this vehicle. So it launched not even a week ago. It launched on Saturday, took a couple days to get up to the space station, and then these photos were actually from Tuesday morning. When the vehicle, you can see pictures of it here, so it starts getting closer to the space station, it gets even closer, and everything's being controlled from the ground that time, either in Houston or in the north of Grumman Mission Control is in Dulles, near Washington, D.C.
Virginia, yep.
And then once the vehicle gets close enough, you can see this right here is actually the robotic arm on the space station. So once the Cygnus unmanned vehicle gets close enough to the space station, astronauts on board, in this case Drew and Jessica, use the robotic arm to grapple, to capture the vehicle as we call it, and then the ground took over again. So my team and Mission Control took over again to maneuver the robotic arm to be able to berth and open the hatches and get all the supplies. I heard the crew was really excited because not only they were excited about some science that we have, some really neat experiments that we have up there, they also had some cheese, which was a pretty big deal because if you think about, you might get sick of eating kind of the same shelf-stable
All of our other cheese
food.
comes out of a tube, so
okay,
anything that doesn't come out of a tube is good.
You get fresh cheese in a refrigerator. That's pretty exciting.
Yeah.
So this is kind of a view of what it looks like in Mission Control. So here I am on my flight director console, and I've got all sorts of other experts who are sitting with me, whether it's people who are responsible for the power systems or the thermal systems or the life support systems, the robotic arm operator, the biomedical engineer who's making sure the crew's staying healthy, the planner, the Russian interface. We've got all these different console positions, and they all report to me with different information, and that helps me make the ultimate decisions about what we need to do, like I said, to keep the crew safe, to keep the vehicle safe, and to complete our objectives. So that's a little bit about what life is like in Mission Control. So there's teams of hundreds of people on the ground that help make things like a spacewalk, hundreds of people who help make the two guys or gals doing the spacewalk in space successful. So a couple more pictures of Ricky out doing a spacewalk. If you want to talk a little bit about either the differences between training on the ground versus in space, and we have some of the tools that we could point out.
Yeah, we can go through these quickly because I think we're getting close to
Okay.
it, so we can get some questions. So a couple things you can't prepare for, I talked a little bit about earlier, is the fact that you're always in motion. What do we got? You cannot prepare for the view, which just blows you away. This is, you can just see the curvature of the Earth at the back, and it's just absolutely stunning view that is very easy to distract you. And the other thing you couldn't prepare for was, the next one is, that's me up on the end of a robotic arm with my buddy inside flying me around. And so the first time where I'm holding onto the space station, and their suit's so big that you can't see where your feet are. So you have to just trust that you put your feet where they're supposed to go and that everything's going to hold together, and you have to let go of the space station, which we are trained over and over and over and over again
never let go of
not
the space
to do.
station.
And the next thing you know, someone's flying you around and you can't see. You either have the Earth at your feet, and there's other times where your feet are pointing up into space and you're looking around and you can see the Earth below you. That's impossible to train for. In the pool, we can fly on the robotic arm, but it just doesn't seem like that big a deal.
And so we talk about it, space walking, but you really don't use your boots for anything, right? As Ricky mentioned, you're using your hands and your gloves to move your way around the space station. The only time that we really do need our boots is when you're getting in a foot restraint to ride on the robotic arm. So Ricky, I've heard this story before. Did you ever have the sensation that you were coming free of the foot restraint? Because you have a little bit of free volume. Your suit doesn't fit that tightly, right?
No.
You have a little bit of space.
So you can float up within your suit, yeah. I spent a lot of time all three of my EVAs during my increment on the space station, I was on the robotic arm, and I spent the vast majority of the time thinking, I hope my feet are still in, I hope my feet are still in, and you can even hear Drew told me to wave, and I'm sitting there waving, but I still have one hand on
right. They have a little
still
handle
see me,
they can
and this
hang
was
on.
well into the spacewalk, so I found it there were times where it wasn't disturbing, then when you actually had time to think about what you were doing, you're like, this just doesn't seem like a good idea.
And so kind of your last resort, we had talked about SAFER, the Simplified Aid for EVA Rescue, the little jetpack. But even though Ricky's let go of the space station, the one thing he is always wearing is his safety tether. So this right here is what's keeping the astronauts safe and attached to the space station. We've got two different versions. One has 55 feet of cable. It's a braided stainless steel cable. We also have an 85-foot version. So one end you would hook up to your spacesuit. The other end you would hook up either to the robotic arm, in Ricky's case in this picture, or you would find one of these gold handrails that you see on the outside of the space station.
You can see them all over the space station. You see the gold. Those got a lot of handrails so people can walk with their hands.
Hook one end up, and now if you want to be the space station, I'm out doing a spacewalk, and now if I let go or if I come out of the robotic arm, I'm only going to go 55 feet away before this will reel me back in. So this is one of the most important, if not the most important tool that an astronaut's always using during a spacewalk. All right, so I think that about wraps things up. So this is another example of one of the space shuttle missions that I worked, of the whole team that it took. So this was STS-134, the final flight of Space Shuttle Endeavour back in May of 2011. So you can see this was the whole team that it took to get that mission executed. So it truly is a lot of folks. And this was just the flight control team. We also have a whole team of engineers as well as other support personnel. So it truly does take a village to be able to be successful in a spacewalk. So now I think we have time for questions.
I haven't
So
forgotten.
Ellen's got the microphone.
Yes.
Did you remember it?
Yeah.
All right.
Yes.
I saw on YouTube, there's a person that said the space shuttle is the most expensivest thing on Earth. It's the most expensivest thing on Earth.
Yeah, so the space shuttles, I think, cost a little, I think between $1 and $2 billion to build, which I don't know like what an aircraft carrier costs to build, but I would imagine that there are other things that we have built that cost more money, but still, they still cost a couple $1 billion at the time when we built them, so they were expensive, and when we lost them, they were hard to replace because you gotta come up with the money to replace them.
But I would say the space station up in space is probably one of the most expensive
Probably
things.
one of the most expensive things we built because I think that cost about $100 billion. Yeah. Get you next.
So the record for the female being in space is like whatever. What's the record for a male, not a female?
Not much longer. Yeah, just around a year. How long was Sergei Krikalev?
I'm not sure.
I think Krikalev was.
Someone's probably got the Google out
Yeah,
there,
someone
right?
could figure that out. But it's
Google it
not.
and help
It's,
us.
I don't think it's much longer than what Christina did. Just right around a year.
And so a lot of, the Americans, I'm trying to think, what are some of the records? I know Peggy Whitson came home after 665 days total that she had spent in space over multiple times. And that's pretty up there, but you've got a lot of the Russian cosmonauts that Ricky alluded to who have spent a lot of time in space, probably on upwards of 700 days in space. So it's pretty incredible.
How big
All right.
is the Earth? How big is the Earth?
It seems really big standing here, doesn't it? And it takes a long time for us to travel. But it's about 24,000 miles around at the equator, which is about 40,000 kilometers. That to me is just a number, but it takes the space station about 90 minutes to go around. But relative to the even just our solar system, the Earth is not even close to one of the largest planets. We're pretty lucky to have this habitable place that we all share. But when you compare it to even the solar system, and then you talk about our galaxy, and then Milky Way galaxy, and you talk about the universe, this is a pretty small, insignificant place, which makes it all the more special.
What do you eat?
It's a good question.
So we eat a lot of either kind of MREs, which I think they have some displays here in the museum, like meals ready to eat that the military eats. We eat a lot of that kind of stuff that comes in a pouch, and you just warm it up and you eat it. We also have a fair bit of dehydrated food where you take the water out so it's lighter to ship to space, and then we'll add the water in, heat it up, and then we'll eat it. When a cargo vehicle comes, if we're lucky, there's some fresh fruit and vegetables. One cargo ship brought a pizza kit, so we made pizza.
And cheese,
and cheese. But that is definitely one of the things you look forward to coming back to Earth is food that actually crunches.
Oh, that's right. Because what's bad about crunchy food? I heard Christina mention one of the things she was looking forward to was chips and guacamole. What would be bad about eating tortilla chips in space?
Crumbs.
They'd
Because
be
crumbs get in your
everywhere.
eye because they float everywhere. And getting crumbs in your eye, it happens a lot on the space station, even though we don't fly a lot of foods with crumbs because of that.
So were you lucky enough to have any ice cream? So
Yes, ice cream. We got ice cream shipped up a couple times, which
so
was
we
a
do
big
have.
deal.
So we've got a couple of refrigerators and freezers that we mainly use for science, but they've been able to reallocate some of those so that Ricky can enjoy either a cold drink, because for a while there was nothing cold to drink on space station. It was either room temperature or hot.
Yeah, so
I'm
cold
sure it's
water
nice
is
to
a
have.
big deal. And then when they have a freezer that they're sending up empty, or they're going to bring something back home and they save the freezer space, they'll send up some ice cream and say, okay, you guys got to eat it in a week
now.
because we need the freezer space for science. But eating a lot of ice cream fast up there is not a big deal. We were more than willing to do our part.
All right, what's your question?
What was it?
What do you eat in the water?
How do the astronauts breathe in the water?
Oh, breathe in the water.
Oh, so like when we were training, there's actually a tube that comes out of the back of the suit, and it plugs into the suit, and it goes up to the surface. And I think on the roof of the building, there's a pump that just pumps air down into the suit, and it takes away the carbon dioxide. So it's a constant flow of air into the suit through a big tube called an umbilical that goes out to the top of the building. So as long as the building's not underwater, we're good. Last question.
Okay.
All righty.
Can you see any other planets in space?
Can you see any other planets? Yes. You can see the exact same planets you can see here from Earth. They just look a little bit clearer. But from Earth, you can see Mercury with your eye. If you know where to look, you can see Mercury, you can see Venus, you can see Mars, you can see Jupiter, and you can see Saturn. If you know where to look, if you go out somewhere outside of the city, you can see all those really easily. We can also see them easily on the space station. The cool thing that's different in space is you see a lot more stars because the atmosphere and light pollution blocks out a lot of stars that are out there. And the other cool thing is that free of Earth's atmosphere, the stars don't twinkle, and you can actually tell which ones are closer and which ones are farther away. So when you look out into space, you can see, oh, well, that star looks like it's a little bit closer than that one. And even in the clearest skies on Earth, out in the middle of a desert somewhere, I've never had that sensation that you can see which stars are, how they're located relative to one another.
Were you lucky enough to see a shooting star, any
Oh,
meteorites?
yeah, below you. You could see,
Meteors, that's
them
cool.
go beneath you, yeah. And if you come to my talk later, I have some pictures of the aurora and some other things that I'll share with you, some video of what it looks like to look at Earth from the space station.
All right, excellent. Well, thank you guys so much for
Thank
joining
you.
us today. And
Thank you for the awesome questions, too.
yes. And like Ricky mentioned, he's got one more presentation today. I have one more presentation today, and I also have a workshop. So take a look at your schedule, and hopefully we'll see you all again today. So thanks. Enjoy the rest of your time at the museum.
Thanks very much. Hey. I have some stickers. Sure. I want to give you guys some stickers. You know what that is? It's a mission patch.
Excuse us, Camp Intrepid, come on over here. On the ISS, how do they dispose of waste? Like,
We put it, okay, so one of those, would you like a mission patch sticker?
okay.
You okay? All right. When a cargo vessel comes up, only a few of them can we actually land in the water and recover. Most of them burn up in the Earth's atmosphere.
No, I mean like human waste on both sides.
Right. They're stored, and it's put in one of those cargo vessels, and it's sent back into the Earth's atmosphere, and it burns up in the atmosphere.
Oh, okay. So like my question was like, how do you go to the bathroom in?
We have a toilet, just kind of similar to the one you have on Earth. The water goes one place, the solid waste goes in a can. The can's sealed shut, and it's stored, and then it's put in a cargo vessel and burned up. Sure. No, not yet. Sure. Most of the stuff we are doing is by telescope. Pardon me?
first time you went to space?
Oh, it's just awesome. Yeah, what do you think? It was like the greatest day. Yeah. Would you like one? Would you like a mission patch? This is from the space shuttle mission if you would like one. You're welcome. It is. That's a mission patch.
Have you guys seen?
Yeah, see?
Went to a planet that has 11 times more water than us.
I haven't been to any other planets other than this one.
Yeah, wait, and also, so you said that you could see a couple of planets, but not all the planets with your eyes. So I'd assume that the other planets you can only see with like a telescope.
Right, exactly. Just like here on Earth.
Can you see a planet?
They're just too dim and too far away. Pardon me?
Did you go to a planet that orbits two suns?
We're not able to send anything. We have a couple of probes that were launched in like the 1970s, which are just they're not even all the way out of our solar system yet. So with the space, the distance is just so huge.